Hello and welcome to the Bravas Luxury Living Podcast. On the Bravas Luxury Living Podcast, we explore ideas and themes that help you live, work, and play in your luxury home with comfort and convenience. We explore ideas and thoughts that everybody should know when they're doing home automation. If this is the first time you found us, please like and share the video. Hit the notification bell if you'd like to know about more videos like it. Most importantly, share with your friends and family that you found this content if you think it'll be useful to them. I do these podcasts with Keith, my colleague from Dallas. Hey, Keith, how are you?
I'm good, Nigel. Having a great day.
Great. So we're going to explore an idea, Keith, that we've talked a bit about before, but we really want to double click in to the idea of home theaters. I remember when I joined Bravas a couple of years ago, we almost didn't want to talk about home theaters or private cinemas anymore. That's pretty different now, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say there was a period where people just weren't doing home cinemas or thought they didn't want them or were being told by the market they didn't want them. But we've really seen, especially with COVID, kind of a return to this desire for this kind of gathering place in the home and a place to have an experience where they don't have to get into a theater.
Okay, well, to guide us through this conversation, we have a guest. His name is Marc Schnoll, who's a product specialist at Sonance. Marc, hello, how are you?
Hi, guys. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for being there. So, Marc, we always ask the first question of our guests, which is, tell us a little about you. How did you get to Sonance? How did you get into this job?
Sure. Well, I hate to say it this way, but I'm a 30 plus year vet of the industry. And I got my start like a lot of people did back in the two-channel stereo days. I was recruited by a rep firm and started my avenue down the manufacturing route. I spent about 15 years with a company called Bowers and Wilkins, and about 5 years ago joined the Sonance team. Left briefly to work for a custom integrator here in Southern California, and then came back to the Sonance team about 8 months ago.
That's great. Now, I think it would obviously be amiss not to talk about where you are. So that I don't think is a virtual picture behind you, is it? That's a real home theater. Tell us a bit about where you're doing this conversation from.
Yeah, so welcome to the Sonance studio here in Southern California. We're in San Clemente, which is the headquarters of Sonance and James, and we're actually in the Sonance and James Theater. It's a dual purpose theater where we're able to bring our clients in and actually play both Sonance and James systems in here and have a lot of fun.
Great. So let's start to explore home theaters, and we'll sort of get into ever increasing more detail. But why don't we start with when what do you think a home theater is? Well, how do you explain it to somebody?
So I think it could be explained in a couple ways. There's such great content out there for movies, and the accessibility now in the home is completely changed with streaming services. And so when I think of home theater, I think of anything that puts you into that movie experience. And so there's lots of different ways to do that. When I say there's two ways, you might just have a media room, maybe it's a multi-purpose room, and you want surround sound in that room, or you go full boat like we are over here and do a full dedicated theater.
So when you say full boat, talk about the room. Let's say I came to you and I said, "Okay, Marc, I want a home theater." So let's start with a room. What are the sort of requirements for the room to make that really work?
Well, I think if we start at the very top and we say, let's allocate a space in the home, a dedicated room for home theater. And when we start with a dedicated room, then we can start looking at the construction of the room, the size, the shape, all the things that go into the acoustics or the sound of the room. And if we can dedicate a space in the home for that, then that lets us go in different directions in how we're going to design the room, both for audio, video, the acoustics, and most importantly to some of the people is how does it look?
How big does the room need to be to make it a practical home theater? I mean, I'm guessing as big as you can, but what's too small?
I would say it all depends on the screen size. So, if most consumers are like me, you want to get as big a screen as possible into that space. And so, if you look at what we call throw distance, and not to use industry terms at all, but basically that's how far that projector needs to sit back in that room to create a largest screen as possible. And so, kind of the good general rule of thumb is, hey, if I want a big 150-inch screen, I need about 14 feet of depth in order to get there. So I would say minimum about 14 feet. Most of the dedicated rooms we end up in probably go between 15 and 25, some in that direction.
There's about 100 things we could talk about to help someone build the right room, and I don't think we'd ever get through all of them. What are some of the really obvious don'ts? Like, what should somebody never do when trying to create a dedicated theater?
Have it be multi-purpose. And if you're going to build a dedicated theater, everything about that should be about the theater. And so the first thing that comes to mind is, hey, we want to make sure we don't have a lot of ambient light. Because if you're using a rear projection system, that ambient light can get in the way. Then when you're actually designing the space, and this room's kind of a perfect example of this, is you notice almost everything is dark in here. And that way when the lights come down and the video comes on, I'm not getting a lot of reflection off of maybe a hard countertop, or maybe it's a piece of furniture in the room that has a glass to it or something like that. So that's probably the first place I start is, hey, we want to make it a dark and quiet room.
And that quiet, it's not just about noise getting out of the room, but also getting back into the room. Can you explain why that's so important?
Yeah, so part of watching movies is the ability to basically forget about life for a moment and really dive into that movie and become part of that experience. Well, if it's a non-dedicated room, if many people are like myself, I've got young kids at home, and maybe the kids are playing in the background, or there's some other ambient noise coming from outside. It's going to distract from that experience of actually watching the movie.
Yeah, I've also run into issues with the noise floor. So essentially, in a movie, if you want to hear the quietest parts of the movie, people whispering or just those small details, to actually be able to hear them over something like a loud air conditioner, you have to turn the volume up so high, you now feel like you're blowing yourself out of the room. And I think that's an important consideration. We always think of acoustics as just keeping the sound from the theater getting into the rest of the house, but it really is important to design that room so that it is separated from the house so that it is a better experience, like you said.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with that. So, my kids have gotten to the age now where they really enjoy kind of scary movies. And so, we just watched A Quiet Place the other day for the first time. And that movie doesn't have a lot of dialogue, but there's a lot of background noise, as you were just talking about there. And if you heard a blower coming from outside or somebody's lawnmower, it would definitely take away from the experience.
So one of the things that I know both Sonance and James um, are really good at is the sound. And I think, you can get a great, the projector, I think, depends on how much you want to spend. I mean, but sound is incredibly variable. Where do you even start the conversation with someone at a home theater about what the right sound is?
Yeah, so I think as you start looking at the room and you start thinking about the amount of mix of speakers that go in there, I think a bad place to start is, hey, what's your budget, right? It would be the equivalent of me approaching somebody and say, go buy a front end bulldozer. Well, how do I know how much that costs? And I think the same thing is with theater. And so I think part of it is to bring people in and give them an idea of the different levels that you can achieve. And so when it comes to video and it comes to audio, I always say, hey, we want to make it as realistic as possible. But the good news is between the two brands at Sonance and James is we can offer somebody from a really, really basic system that sounds good to this amazing experience that you would get at James, and the super high output capability, the bass extension at the bottom end, right? How much do I want to feel that T-Rex kind of going through my stomach as I'm watching the movie? And so those are the kind of conversations we have with people. And I think it's really great when we can bring them in here and kind of show them the differences between them.
But I want to step through some of the technologies because I think that, there are steps you can take up, and maybe the lowest step and I don't mean to insult anybody here, but it is a sound bar. I mean, I
Sure.
live in an apartment, so a sound bar and a TV is as close as I'm getting to a home theater. Um, what are some of the limitations in your mind of just using a sound bar as your key audio source?
I would say for the inexpensive soundbar market out there, the limitations are going to be output capability. They're only going to be able to play so loud. And for some people, maybe in an apartment like yourself, that might be just fine. But for somebody that's looking for something that's going to be more engaging, more filling inside of the room, that might not be the right solution. The other fun thing that happens with cinema is you get lots of action moving around the screen. So we see it with our eyes, but we also want to hear it with our ears as well. And so with a sound bar, it can only be so wide. In theory, it's going to match the width of the television. And so I'm not going to really get a lot of that movement from left to right as I'm using a sound bar. And then of course, I don't get the rear channel speakers in there, which is a lot of fun to give you that fill-in information.
Now the people who I see advertising sound bars they say, well, these are Atmos or Dolby Plus or something rated. So I want to do two things. I want to try and decode what all of some of those things mean, and then work out whether we need them and how we get them. So first of all, what are some of the sound, buzzwords that when you're building a home theater today, you should be asking about?
Well, if you're going to build a dedicated theater, you definitely want to go Atmos. So we kind of got to go back in time a little bit and figure out where we were and how we got to where we are today. And so with surround sound, let's say I'm watching a movie and in that scene, the car starts at the front and then zips behind me. So what I really want to do is I want that sound to kind of follow me. So it's going to start in the front speakers and then it's going to get a little louder as it hits my ears and then get louder towards the rear of the room to replicate the action on the screen. Well, with Atmos, not only can we do that, but we can actually do overhead height speakers and we can do three-dimensional sound. And so it gives the directors or the sound mixers the ability to say, hey, not only can we sweep stuff around you, we can actually put it over your head now and place all these different things in the room. So they can get really creative as they're creating the sound in the movies and then when we can replicate that home, we get this amazing experience.
Now, is Dolby, DTS, and Atmos, are these all things different? Are they, I see lots of names. Are they connected in any way?
Yeah, so these are basically formats, and without getting overly technical here, what they're referring to is on the movie itself, there's an encoding. And that encoding is, hey, this is how we're going to steer the information to the individual speakers in the room. And so you have something called Dolby, and then you have something called DTS, which are kind of competing formats. Being perfectly honest, we're agnostic. Whatever gets you in that scene, we are fantastic with. The great news is most of the modern day equipment out there is able to decode both of these formats out there. And then, of course, Dolby Atmos is where we start adding those height channels as we talked about before.
So great explanation of that. Going back to the speakers that are playing those sounds for us, we talked about the sound bars, which, as you said, not really a great solution for a theater, but if you are limited in that, they do work. But talk about the in-wall speakers. I can see them behind you. Probably the only real way we could get those speakers all around us. I don't want people to have the mistaken belief that if they want that Dolby Atmos sound, they have to be able to see speakers all over their room. So let's talk about that. It's kind of the next progression of speakers. What do y'all do with in-wall and in-ceiling speakers?
Sure, yeah. Well, I will tell you that, this theater is a little different that we're in here. Sonance starts with something called design to disappear. And so it's our belief that the technology should either be hidden into the architectural space or blend with it. This room we did a little bit differently because we just wanted to highlight what was in the room rather than everybody was always asking, what's there and what's there and what's there. So they can walk in the room here and physically see it. So there used to be a limitation on in-wall sound. And there used to be this limitation of, hey, we can't play them super loud. They can't get get to that same output level that maybe a big box speaker would have in the room. Well, that has completely changed over the last couple years. Material sciences, the way the speakers are made, the mechanical structures that they actually live in allow us to get that same output capability out of an in-wall or an in-ceiling speaker today that we could only hope to get out of just a floor standing speaker years ago.
Now, are we talking about something like what you've got behind you, which looks to me like you took the grills off them so we could see you had speakers there, and things that are actually behind the particle board? I mean, because you can actually physically, I know, put speakers in the wall, behind the wall, but I don't know whether I would want to do that for sound for my theater.
Yeah, so it's interesting. We have a new product, not that it's new category, but we have these things called invisible speakers. And we actually have a space here in the studio, and we call it our invisible living room, where we bring people into that space. And it's completely drywalled, and you can't see any of the technology, and it really puts you into that space. And so I would say that's great for what we call a surround sound system. The average living room, maybe somebody's den or family room, or even master bedrooms. When we get to the level that we're in here, which is a dedicated theater, to get the output capability that we're looking for, is we're going to look for something that basically either lives in the wall or lives in the ceiling. And so with these, you are definitely going to see grills. But the good news is, when you're talking about making a dark room like we have over here, what you can do is you can paint those grills black so they really blend in with the ceiling, for example. Or if you're going to put them into sconces or something on the wall, what you're going to probably do is you're going to cover that up with some type of material. Maybe it's an acoustic panel, or maybe it's just some fabric that's being laid over the top of it. So you can still achieve this, hey, I don't see any of the technology, but I'm still getting that incredible high output.
Yeah, and I guess we should add that at the front of the room, we'll typically put those in-wall speakers directly behind the screen, so they get that audio directly from, it appears it's coming directly from the screen, but you still don't see the speakers. They're just completely hidden away.
Yeah, I would agree 100% with that. And there's a lot of different screen companies out there. We happen to be a big fan of Stewart Film Screens in this space here. And we actually have a drop-down screen. And when that drop-down screen is in its fully down position, it is covering the speakers, but the screen is perforated. So it actually allows all that sound to come through, so we're not losing anything.
Now, I go to some home theaters where they've got that was hard for me to say, floor standing speakers that look like they would have come from a traditional 2-channel stereo system. What's the advantage of that type of speaker in this scenario?
So I would say in years past, you probably needed to use a floor standing speaker to get that really high level, that output sound to replicate maybe what a commercial theater had, that experience when you went into a commercial theater. I would say now we're getting as close, or really you can't differentiate between what the floor standing speaker has and what an in-wall speaker has, particularly with a company like James. Without going heavily into too much of the technology, James is really made to do something special that most other in-wall speakers can't do, and that's get this high output capability that really envelops you in that sound, but still have that product being able to be buried into a wall. So the downside of using a floor standing speaker is either they're gonna be in the room with you, so now I have to design that space to where, hey, am I going to bury them? Are they going to be in the room? Is it going to block the screen? So there's all those different things I have to take into account. And then if I'm going to put it maybe into a cavity, now I've got to, hey, take this room and I'm going to build a fake wall in front of it to hide those. Well, we don't really have that issue when we're talking about a speaker that actually is meant to live in the wall. So I would say years past, right, everybody went to the floor stander because of the output capability. That's a thing of the past. We don't need to do that anymore because of the technology of today.
So you mentioned commercial theaters, and that obviously is kind of our grounding level. That's our expectation for how good a theater can be. What can somebody expect in their home? Like, can somebody expect a full commercial theater experience in their home?
That's a great question. So, when we bring people into this space behind me, one of the first things I do is I dispel that myth. And the myth is, can I get the same kind of sound I get in a commercial theater into my home theater? And I would argue you actually get better sound in a dedicated theater like I'm in here. So a commercial theater has lots of issues. The first of one being the room. They're enormous. And so you're trying to fill that room up and energize that room with bass and the sound in it. So there's kind of no perfect seat. And pre-pandemic, we all love going to theater, right? That giant screen and the popcorn and everything's there. I think post-pandemic, or where we find ourselves today, people are still a little reluctant to get out there. And so you have the advantage of having everything your own room, and you're not giving anything up. So in a room like we're in here, what we can do is we can control every aspect of it. We can control what the acoustics are of the room, which means how's it going to sound. We can control the look of the room. And really important to the end user is the comfort level of the room. You can see some theater seats behind me over here. They don't have to be theater seats. Maybe somebody wants some really comfy couches in there, right? And so I also think there's this really special thing happening with home theater right now, to where what we're really trying to do is everybody wants to engage their family more. And so trying to get your kids off of the small screen. And we say a great way to do that is have everybody stare at the big screen. And right, maybe you're not having a conversation with each other the whole time the movie's on, but you're snuggling with your kids, right? It's a real family experience. So you're going to get that really incredible sound, which I think is far superior to a commercial theater. And you get that great experience of hanging with the family.
Yeah, so this is the source of aggravation in my house, because the big theater we like is actually not really a big theater. It's a multi-screen of a lot of small theaters where I don't think they're even 4K projectors, and the sound is terrible, but the seats are great. So my wife optimizes around the seat, and I'm going like, why is this picture so bad? Why is the sound so muffled? So but you did say one other thing in there, which I did want to pick up on, and we've not really talked about bass or subs. So let's talk a bit about where they fit in your picture.
Sure. Listen, you're going to take me back to my days of designing systems back in the 90s and 2000s. And one of the things I always told people was, there's not one piece that's going to make a bigger difference in your surround sound, home theater, or full theater like we have here than a subwoofer. And so when you're at a commercial theater and all of a sudden the dinosaur is walking across the screen or the car crashes, it's that bass that really gives it that impact that says, hey, I'm experiencing something very different here. And so if you're in real life scenario and you're near an airport and that plane takes off, you feel it as much as you hear it. And really that's what the subwoofer is going to do for you. Now, previously, our only choices were this. Hey, do you want a giant black box or do you want a small black box that's going to sit in the room with you, right? And so we always had to make this, compromise as far as what the look of it. So with Sonance and James, we now give the consumer the option to say, how do you want your sound to look? And that includes the subwoofer. So we can take subwoofers, we can bury them in the wall. If you want to see the grill, we can do that. Or we can actually do something in James called a power pipe, to where we can take these incredibly large, high output, amazing quality, and then with a tube, we can actually vent it either through the wall or even do it through the floor. And at that point, it just looks like a forced air vent, or maybe I'm putting it into the baseboards, and I want it to look like stone. We have all these incredible options at James that we can do this with. So you still get that thunderous bass, but maybe not have to stare at the big box in the room with you.
Yeah, I do want to talk more about the aesthetics, but first I want to agree with you on the importance of the sub. My daughter loves when we get to watch movies in the theater and we have the same quality TV, we have the same quality speakers, but downstairs we have a small sub in a huge room, and upstairs in our theater we have two very large subs in a small room. And to her, like that experience, she says it just shakes my body. Like she loves that. And so it's not just audiophiles. It's not just people that really appreciate that. It is an experience that we all share because it is something lifelike that doesn't seem like it could fit on a small screen that we get to like really engage with. So totally agree there. Well, let's circle back to aesthetics real quick. I love the power pipe because of what it can do. But how do you think having a room that looks like a theater and looks special and isn't just kind of a drywalled box with a TV on the wall, like how does that change the client's experience owning that space or their desire to use it?
Yeah, I think if you, and this really depends on the individual because everybody has different expectations on what a theater can be and what it can look like. But I say if you can create a room like this, right, and you walk into it and it feels like a theater, you kind of get that, hey, there's something special here. And when there's something special here, you're really looking forward to using it. And so I remember in the past, people would make a theater like this and maybe the look of the room wasn't as important as the sound of the room. And it just wasn't fun to be in. And so a lot of people actually weren't using it very much. But now what we can do is we can create this with, hey, there's a place out front where I can get my popcorn maker and have your favorite candy, right, and all the things that the kids and we love going to the movies with. And so I think mentally it just prepares you to get ready to watch that movie, and you're really excited to do it.
I want to ask a silly question because whenever I talk to home theater people, if I'm not careful, they disappear into, X.Y.Z and 3.1.4. And so give us a quick primer on what those mean and if you have a sense of what matters about that.
Sure. So in a dedicated theater, there's a certain number of channels, is what we call them. And those channels are pretty simply how many speakers do we have in the room, right? And so most of the time in a home theater, what you're going to start with is the left speaker, the center channel, and the right speaker. And we call those LCRs. Most of the on-screen vocals are going to come from that center channel. And the reason we do that is, hey, when I'm watching a screen, I want to feel like the characters are talking to me rather than having the sound come from maybe the left or the right, but my focus is on the center of the screen. So that's 3 of the channels. And then for years, what we did is we did 5 channels. And what that means is I had that left, that center, that right, and then somewhere in the room I put a set of rear speakers behind me. And so we called that a 5-channel system. Well, now what we're doing is we're now expanding the speaker count, and this has to do with Atmos and the way they're mixing, and a lot of it is also going to be the size of the room. You can see here we have 3 sets of rows, or 3 rows of chairs. And so we want to make sure that every row gets that same experience. And so we fill it in with side channels as we go back into the room, and then a set of rear channels. And so now when that action happens on the screen, everybody in this room is getting that. So in this theater, we actually have 9 speakers in what we call the horizontal plane. So these are the ones that are surrounding you here. Now you're going to hear 9 point something point something. So the next number is going to be the number of subwoofers in the room. And so without getting overly technical, I would argue lean on the side of more subwoofers than less. And there's some real acoustic reasons that you want at least 2 subwoofers in the room, in different locations in the room, preferably speaking. And so in that case, you would start with like 5 speakers, 0.2. That would be 2 subwoofers. And then that last number, point whatever it is going to be the number of the speakers that go above your head for an Atmos system. So in this theater, we have a lot of fun. We do in the Sonance, it's a 9.4.4, which means we have 9 speakers around us, 4 subwoofers, and then 4 overhead height channels. And James, we take it to a 9.3.6 system. So we have a lot of fun in this room.
I still think you could add more subs, but we can talk about that later.
I think there's a club which should be titled "You Can't Have Enough Subs Club."
Keith,
I know plenty of our employees would be
space. Yeah,
Yeah.
we have one of the James makes a set of speakers called Maverick, and they're this incredibly high output, big box speakers that we make to go up against all the other big guys that are out there. And the one we have in this room is called a 21.3, and the driver is literally 21 inches, and there's 3 of them. So when the bass note hits in here, it is this depth you get, and particularly, a lot of people don't realize this with theater, is we love doing concerts in this room, meaning, right, all these great bands create all these concert videos. So it doesn't just have to be a movie. One of the favorite scenes we play in here is from a movie called A Star is Born, and I'm sure everybody knows that one with Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga, and we play the song Shallow in here. And the really cool bit about that song is when you're listening to a live band in a live arena, there's something really magical about the live bass, right? It gets this deep, deep note to it. And we can actually replicate it with the big 21.3 and then 2 power pipes in this room. But don't let me go down the subwoofer. I'll talk about subwoofers all day if you guys will let me.
And I'll talk about the Judy Garland and James Mason version of A Star of Born and why that's better. But that's... Sorry, Keith.
Love it.
So just kind of real simply, if we were to kind of rank the different places where someone could spend their money. So let's say the room itself, like the acoustic treatments of the room, the number of speakers, the quality of speakers, and maybe the video. How do you see that kind of, what's the most important and where should somebody focus to get the best experience? And you are allowed to be biased here. I know you guys make speakers, but I will probably agree with you.
I think they're all important, right? I think whatever excite somebody and inspire somebody to use that space. And so one of the clients may say, hey, we're just going to play these at really low levels, but we want something super comfortable. And they might spend more money on the furniture. Now, me personally, I love to feel like I'm part of the experience. And so part of that experience is to getting that volume of sound that's out there, right? To really get engaged with whatever's happening on screen. And so in that case, I think the speakers are a great place to spend the money. And then, of course, video is incredible. And what I want to say about video very quickly is what you get for your dollar these days is just amazing when it comes to video. The companies have done an amazing job with their projectors, with their big screens that they might put on the wall. And it used to be that you'd have to spend $100,000 or $150,000 on a projector screen combination to really get that kind of film quality out of it. The great news is with the technology, those price points have come way down. And so some people are videophiles and they're going to spend that extra money to get those small incremental differences on the video. But the great news is you don't have to break the bank when it comes to video. I do suggest investing into a really nice theater, particularly if you do have ambient light coming into the room. That's where you really need to get that output level of light or the luminance out of that projector. Now, if it's a dark room, it allows you to really play with it a little bit more. But I think the speaker count, if you're going to create this experience, this envelopment of sound, because Atmos is based on, and you guys probably know the number better than I do, but something like, I don't know, over 100 speakers you can have in the space if you really wanted to. Well, that probably gets a bit overkill for most people.
We're happy to do it.
But certainly... Yeah, we are happy. Believe me, at a speaker company, we are as well. So, but I think realistically, most people, if they can end up with either a 5 or a 7-channel system, a couple subwoofers in there, and some overhead height channels, it's really going to get them into the ballpark and in the game. And listen, I don't want to leave out the people that can only do a sound bar, because there are ways of making a sound bar sound good. Both on the Sonance and James side, we have these really great sound bars, and they're really big sellers for us. What I would say for those people is, hey, let's make sure we can get a rear channel set of speakers. Maybe it can be in the ceiling, maybe it's in the room behind you, but somewhere in there to create that experience of envelopment of sound. And by all means, get a subwoofer in that room some way, somehow. It's going to make everything sound bigger.
Yeah, I think we also have to explore as a company. I think we're talking more about sound, and this has been great information. I think, Keith, we probably need to explore projectors as well, because I know we're starting to recommend laser projectors rather than bulb-based ones, because while the laser projectors are more expensive, you can pay the difference in bulbs if you're not careful as well. So look, this has been great information. I think very exciting, and we would love to bring people to your place in California and to show them this system. And I look forward to seeing it myself one day. But before we let you go, we do play a little game, which is sort of the thing we do with all guests, maybe to get a bit more of an insight. Now we've softened you up a bit. And it's 3 simple questions. for you, so we learn a bit more about you, Mark. And the first question is around home technology and home automation. Is there, outside your speakers, which we understand are essential to your life force, is there another piece of home technology that is essential to how you live and play at home every day?
Yeah, I thought about that question a bunch, and there's a lot of things in my home technology wise I couldn't live without. But I think the number one thing for me is I couldn't live without my automated shades. And I know that has nothing to do with sound, but it has everything to do with the way that my wife and my family and I live our lives. And if I didn't have them, I think about the time it would take me every day to walk around my house opening and closing shades. And so at my house, I am into automation. I love things that I can set and forget. And my shades being one of those. So we have everything on timers. In the morning they go off or they go up, and then at nighttime they come down, and I just never have to put any thought behind it. So that and my lighting. Those are my two biggest things in my house I could not live without, my automated lighting systems.
Yeah, we understand that. When you think about maybe your time at James, Sonance or James, what's the best project? What's the most exciting project you think you've done? What's your big marquee project that you look back on and think, wow, that was incredible?
Yeah, there's a couple of them that really come to mind. And I love the fact that particularly with James, and one of the reasons that Sonance really acquired James a couple years ago was to be able to customize a product to really fit the space. And so, prior to that, when somebody came to us and said, hey, we need a speaker, but we need it this big or this size, our answer was always, hey, that's a great idea, which is really just a nice way of saying no. But at James, now we can sit at the table with the designer. And I think one of the projects, and we have pictures of it here, was it was in Lake Minnetonka in Minnesota. And this gentleman was building a space to where it was a big outdoor deck and then a pool right below it. And he loved the idea of entertaining out there, but there was nowhere to put speakers. And so we ended up working with the landscape architect and the builder, and we all said, hey, there's this glass railing system that kind of goes all the way around that deck. How can we get sound out there? And everybody kind of scratched their heads, and somebody said, what if we make the speakers part of the railing system? And so nobody had thought about that before. And so we took a speaker and actually created it to where these glass panels come together, and every third one became a speaker. And we worked with the company that was installing the railing system, and it actually became part of the mounting platform as well. So that was one of the coolest ones I think we've done recently. But that's the kind of fun thing we can do at James, is we can really think outside the box in ways to kind of hide the sound or blend it in that nobody's thought of before.
That's amazing. I think there are probably lots of places we could sell that. And finally, but last but no means least, if there was a piece of technology for home automation or just general life automation that has yet to be invented, what's the magic solution you would like? Do you have one?
There's two of them, and they're probably both ridiculous. But the first one is I think the biggest challenge every person in every family faces every day is what's for dinner. And so if there were that from Back to the Future Part 3, that little thing I could put into somewhere and get good quality food with a snap of a finger, oh my goodness, that would change everybody's lives. And then my second one would be to be able to teleport anywhere. But it also terrifies me as well.
Yes, that always worries me, that somehow I have to be exploded into a billion pieces before I can be reassembled. And I don't want there to be a problem with the memory chip when that happens. But
Needs a reboot.
Yeah, exactly. So listen, Mark, that was great. That was really good. I'd love to see what our different viewers and listeners think. I'm sure we'll get lots of questions. That was great. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to catching up with you later. Thanks.
Oh, thank you guys. Really appreciate you putting this together and allowing us to be part of it. So thanks so much.
Thanks for the time, Mark.